welcome to my Frost Death Knight guide. And what an amazing class this is. I wanted to make a video to describe how I have come to terms with this amazing class. It's certainly one of the most popular class choices in World of Warcraft, not least to do with the fact that you start at level 55, but actually because the three specializations in the class are all very strong and bring a lot to the table. There is one tanking class, which is the blood spec, and two damage per second specs, the frost and the unholy. A lot of players actually enjoy the unholy spec. It's not really for me. You have a pet, and I don't really do pets, if you know what I mean. I don't enjoy having to manage pets and deal with that kind of side of things. But for some players, especially for instance if you were accustomed to being a hunter, that would be a nice alt spec to consider. Now, the Frost Death Knight. Well, for many years I was a ret paladin, and there's always, and I'm sure to this day, continuing on, a huge kind of battle between the Rets and the Frost Death Knights, and I'm just as guilty as any other aficionado of Retribution Paladins to have thought that, you know, the Frost Death Knights were somehow inferior, they were so easy to play, etc, etc. And now that I've actually enjoyed my time with more than one Frost Death Knight, this one you can see I'm leveling up. She's at 98 in the new Warlords of Draenor expansion in her expounding base here. This is the barracks, the garrison that you will get. This is at tier 2, this is the level 2 version of it, and eventually that'll become a level 3. You can already see how expansive it is, so if you've never played, if you're considering getting Warlords of Draenor and don't really know if you should be bothered, this is one of the great reasons to get it. You get your own city, your own town, with so many things to do in it. You've got your own mailbox and all these convenient things. And many buildings to upgrade, which all offer different quests and things to do. Some dependent on professions that you have, some not. So many interesting choices, so many things, great ideas in this expansion. But anyway, I'm not really here to talk about the expansion itself. I just encourage you to get it. It's a great thing. What I'm going to discuss now is how I've come to terms with the Frost Death Knight and how I play them, and I will do that by showing you the talents and the glyphs that I've used in my construction of it, and talk about why I've made those choices, and then I'll go on to how I keybind. I know that can be a gripe for many, and it was for me for a long time, and why certain spells don't actually need to be keybound. They can be clicked, although that's a bit controversial. But if you'll see on the screen already, I'm not using any other add-on for the UI. I'm using the Blizzard UI. I think it's perfectly fine. In fact, it's very minimalist in its concept, and I don't really see the advantage of many of the other UIs. I've tried Elf UI and stuff, and okay, it looks a little neater and things, but if you want the actual writing, the text on the screen to be readable without a magnifying glass, then you're going to change the UI setting. I'll show you where that is. Under System, here you can change, I think it's under Advanced, let's go there. Yeah, there you see the UI scale. So you're going to end up increasing the UI scale on those add-ons anyway, and you'll end up with something that's not far removed from the Blizzard interface, and in fact it might be even clunkier, it might fill up more space, so that really the advantages are here there. I mean, if you want something that looks different, then go for it, but for me, no. I moved the targeting windows to the center, and you can unlock all the frames. You know, I've got my, as you can see with the cursor, I've got my chat log here, and I added 2 action bars on the top, over the top, and that's enough for me. So let's go straight in to the Specializations and Talents window. Go to Talents. Now, you start at level 55 as a Death Knight, and at 56, which is a blink away, you already have a choice. And my advice really is that any ability that's passive is really preferable to anything that you're going to have to keybind, dependent on its utility. So in this tier here, well, a lot of players, I started by using Unholy Blight, and I thought that was quite a good idea. But it has its uses, but it's not essential. It's not. You know, it's another keybind, and you will get Death and Decay later on. So really, that's not negligible. Plague Leech. Well, you're not using Blood Plague as a Frost Decay. It has a utility, but as you'll see later on with the build that the way that I've constructed it, it's not going to make that big a difference overall. So Plague Bearer is the one here. Now, first of all, it's a passive ability, so you don't have to worry about it. Second thing is that it adds and augments this ability at level 100, which I encourage everybody to get, which is Necrotic Plague. So Plague Bearer will, with your Frost Strike, infect your target, adding 4 seconds to the duration of Frost Fever. So it extends the duration of the fevers that you're putting on the dots, the damage over times, which is one of the biggest differences between the Ret Paladins and the Death Knights, that the Ret Paladins don't really do DOT at all. It's not something they have to contemplate. But with Death Knights, it's you know, it's something you need to get your head around, and you need to apply those diseases. Something I ignored when I started off with the Death Knight, it's not really that important. It makes a difference. You need to be aware of that, and I'll show you in the key bindings how that can be simplified. Now, so Plague Bearer, that's your choice, or my choice for the 56. When you get to 57, now, Anti-Magic Zone sounds like a great idea, but it has 2 huge detriments. One, it's a 2-minute cooldown. In fact, it has 3 detriments. The first, it has to be keybound. The second is, it's a 2-minute cooldown. That's quite a long time in an instance. And it only lasts for 3 seconds. That's a blink. Basically, you've hit the button, and before you know it, it's disappeared. It really is ineffectual. It does reduce spell damage, but not all types of damage for 20% for the party or raid members. But if your healers can't cover 20% for 3 seconds, then you know something's seriously going wrong. Other characters will bring in far better skills. And also with anti-magic, for yourself, you'll be getting anti-magic shell later on, so it's negligible. Purgatory, well, that also sounds like a great idea until you read the second part, which says if any healing absorption remains when this effect expires, you will die. So you have a passive ability which will become even more dangerous as you level up. So yes, get rid of it. You don't want a passive ability that can actually kill you off. Not a good idea. So Lichborn here is Lichborn, although he has to be keybound, and it does have a 2-minute cooldown. It can go on your list, as I'll show you, of the major cooldowns that you won't be using all the time, and it's very useful. It lasts 10 seconds, and it will augment one of the new stats in Warlord's Draenor called Leech, but also it makes you immune to Charm, Fear, and Sleep, so you don't have to worry about those for 10 seconds, especially on some of the big boss fights as well. It's really useful. When you get to level 58, really there's only one choice that you should consider, and that's Death's Advance. The others have their uses, but Death's Advance is the one that's going to give you that movement burst that most characters now have. Most classes have this movement choice of some description, and Death's Advance is the Death Knight's one. Take that, because immediately you move 10% faster, and when you activate it, you not only go 30% quicker for 6 seconds, but nothing can slow you down. Okay, so there's no movement impairing effects that affect you. It's very useful when you're in a mob or something, in a raid or a party, or you're in loads of AoE and I need to get out of this and I'm jumping all over the place, can't get out of it quick enough. Hit Death's Advance and you'll be speeding out of it. It's very useful to get for short bursts like that. And also if you're soloing, if you somehow manage to attract taunt or aggro lots of mobs after you and you just can't be arsed, or you think you're going to die from that, hit Death's Advance and burst you away from them, and hopefully you can outrun them and they'll return to their original position. So Death's Advance is the one. there, 58. A little bit of weight to 60. Now, Blood Tap, I've heard that described a lot as a possible usage, but Blood Tap is something that you're going to have, first of all, keybind, and you're going to have to watch. And really, overall, in terms of the mechanics of the character that you're playing, it's not that great an advantage. You have to wait until you get enough blood charges, and then all it does is to regenerate a fully depleted room. So it only works if you've got a depleted room for the start, and then it will become a death room. But you'll be creating death rooms anyway as you go along. So the two choices come down to Runic Empowerment and Runic Corruption. Runic Corruption is quite nice, you can read that and have a look at it, but I chose Runic Empowerment because anything that's good to help you with your ability to regenerate runes consistently is a bonus, and Runic Empowerment really is the one to choose there. So you're going to wait a while until you get to one of the Death Knight's biggest weaknesses, and that's self-healing. There is only really one choice at level 75, and that's Death Pact, which gives you 50% of your health and allows you to absorb healing quite well. But that is one of Death Knight's downfalls, if you like. Unlike, opposed to a Ret Paladin, which has so many ways of healing, it has two main healing spells, the Ret Paladin, and a pretty meaty protection spell, and also Cleanse, which gets rid of things that, poisons and things, curses. So, Ret Paladins are really well balanced in that respect. Death Knights, unfortunately, the Death Pact is the only one you've got, and major bummer, a 2-minute cooldown, which is so inconvenient sometimes, just hasn't regenerated. So it's worthwhile investing in some of the professions like first aid, so you can create bandages and stocking up on potions and stuff. But yes, that's a spell you should be taking at level 75 as far as I'm concerned. When you get to level 90, it's Remorseless Winter. Now, why Remorseless Winter? The other two are great, you can have a look at them, you can play around with them, but Remorseless Winter is a wonderful spell in a raid or a party, because you click that, it works very well with Death and Decay, or interchangeable with Death and Decay. It only has a minute cooldown, so it's a relatively quick cooldown. You will have to keybind it, but it will freeze any targets in a mob around you for 6 seconds. What it does is it spins a whirlwind of frost stuff, and when they get hit 5 times, they freeze, they become a block of ice, and it is so useful when you're in a big mob with the tanks mob. You've got a big mob around him, and everybody's targeting perhaps one particular person in that NPC in that mob. To freeze them all for 6 seconds, give everybody a breather, and of course you can continue attacking those targets. They can't attack back, so very, very useful. When you get to level 100, as I pointed out, it's Necrotic Plague. That is the one you want to choose. It is a passive ability. It replaces your Frost Fever with a very powerful version of a fever. And in fact, Outbreak, which you will start to use as you get higher up, is a slight improvement on Frost Fever. But once you get to 100 and you get Necrotic Plague, you can almost forget about Outbreak, actually. It doesn't become a priority, because everything that you're inflicting in terms of disease is now Necrotic Plague, and it's so much more powerful than Outbreak. So those are the talent choices that I have chosen. Now let's get on to the Glyphs. So click over to the Glyphs, and these are the ones that I've chosen. Now, I'm going to talk about Death Grip. Controversial for me. When I was starting out as a Death Knight, yes, Death Grip seemed to be a great addition, a great thing to have. But actually, in hindsight, I would advise anybody who's kind of serious about a Death Knight, especially a Frost Death Knight, to get rid of Death Grip. Just get rid of it. Don't even bother keybinding it. Don't use it. Death Grip, even if you get the glyph associated with it, which stops it taunting mobs and taunting others, has a horrible way of reducing aggro for tanks. So you can imagine you have the tank is trying, or both tanks are trying to attract the mobs. Those mobs as a whole carry aggro. Every single part of that mob, every NPC in that mob is carrying a percentage of aggro. Along comes Death Knight, and he takes one out. that reduces the aggro overall on the mob, making the tank's job harder. And also, if you're not careful, you can take out an ad that might be really difficult to cope with singly, and you're also soloing at that point. You're attacking an ad individually, which, okay, you can do that anyway by selecting the target when you run in. You don't need to be separating it with Death Grip. Yeah, Death Grip, just forget about it. I would forget about it. And the reason I say forget about it is the primary strike should be Chains of Ice. Chains of Ice is wonderful. Not only does it signify which target you're going very clearly, but it slows that target down, it adds Frost Fever, it does a lot of wonderful things. And if you add this glyph, which is Glyph of Icy Runes, every time you apply it, it will help you regenerate runic power. So every time you're using that ability, you're adding to the reservoir of runic power that you have for everything else. It's fantastic, it really works. Clicks. Second major glyph after that should be, well, I would choose Glyph of Icy Touch, because you will be using Glyph of Icy Touch to spread your Frost Fever. And when you have this glyph, it also has a nice little bonus that it will get rid of a magic effect from the target. So it dispels an effect. That's really useful for everybody concerned. And then the third one, Glyph of Runic Power. And the reason I chose that is because often in a raid or instance, you will get bogged down in something. There will be something hindering your movement. Yes, you can get out of it, as I've said, with Death's Advance, but if you don't, and you can't, or you don't want to, while you're stuck in it, you're regenerating your runic power, so when you come out of it, you're all kicking. It's a very useful thing to have. Minor glyphs, where the major one you need is the Glyph of Army of the Dead, which is your biggest cooldown. 10 minutes cooldown on Army of the Dead. It's pretty much only usable maybe up to a maximum of twice in any given dungeon. But it's very useful, it's a great thing to have. So you don't want your Army of Dead taunting the target, just as I described the difficulty with Death Grip, don't want that. So you need that Glyph of Army of the Dead to stop it taunting the target and basically winding up the tanks. Glyph of Path of Frost is quite useful because when you hit your Path of Frost, it can help you reduce damage or negligate damage from falling from, relative heights. Not like the mage's ability to fall, not at all, not that spell, but it's very useful. And if in some dungeons, some of the earlier dungeons, where you tend to be jumping off things, or here's an instance, an Ice Crown, if you're soloing that on the 25-man or 10-man, when you defeat, in the Scarlet Halls, you defeat the last boss there, the chandelier goes through the wall. I don't know if anybody you can picture that in their mind or remember it, and you get a hole, and you can drop through the holes so you don't have to go all the way back round. If you hit Icy, that would be a time to hit your Path of Frost to reduce the damage as you fall through that hole in the ground. Anyway, this one I haven't filled in yet, but I tend to put the one for the Army of the Dead that changes Foul Menagerie, changes all of their looks. It's a cosmetic thing, but there's quite a few interesting ones there you might want to have a play with there. So those are the talents and the glyphs that I've chosen, and now we'll go on to the key bindings. So if you look at a normal QWERTY keyboard, and I might actually put something up on the video to show you as I'm narrating this, you have W, A, S, and D. Those are your direction keys, and then the keys that I would keybind after that would be using Tab, Q, E, and R on that line, on the QWERTY line. And then I would use F next to D, and then I would use 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 at the top, and those are the key bindings that I would stick to. Okay, so you don't really, that's manageable for most people. I know more advanced players will start using Shift or Alt or whatever to change up these keys, so you've got combinations, but that gets a little bit too much for a player like myself, and really not that necessary, as you'll see. So if we go down, you'll also notice that all key bindings are next. It's very easy to key bind. I'll show you. You just go to key bindings, and you'll see your action bar here, and you can work out which spell goes where. Action button 1 is here, the first one goes along, and then if you look further on to your multi-action bar, you'll work out, so for instance that's this top line here. If you want to keybind any of these on the additional action bars, so very easy really to work out, it won't take you too long. So here we've got Howling Blast on Q, very easy to reach. Got Plague Strike on E, again, both of them next to W, which is the forward movement key, and then R is Frost Strike, so those are the 3 main striking abilities. Tab then is Obliterate, which is your huge big strike. Okay, so that's all of the major striking abilities right next to W, very easy. F for AoE, which is Death and Decay, so that can go on F, that's very neat and easy to remember. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Well, 1, 2 and 3, this is great. That combination can be taken up with Chains of Ice, Icy Touch and Mind Freeze. And so what you can do is you can kind of triplicate those keys. You can hit all of those keys more or less at once when you target an enemy. So not only have you hit them with your Chains of Ice and applied Frost Fever with that and your Icy Touch, but if you've got it, when you get in range, if you're within range, you can hit them with Mind Freeze. And Mind Freeze, you should be always, seeking to exploit that spell whenever you can. Try and interrupt and stop spell casting, very useful. So those 3 really fit very well on the keys 1, 2, 3. Things get a little bit more complicated. You can put Outbreak on number 4. Like I said, that gets eclipsed once you get to 100 by Necrotic Plague, but until then you're going to need to use Outbreak. And an Outbreak is it's got a minute cooldown, so you can't use it all the time. You'll be using Icy Touch much more than you will be using Outbreak. We'll put that on key 4, so when it's available you can use it. And one that might throw a spanner in the works when you get it, Soul Reaper, which is at level 85. You need to be using Soul Reaper when your target's down to about 35% health, and put that on key 5, because again, you won't be using it as much as Obliterate, but boy is it a really powerful spell. You need that keybound. Now, all the spells that you don't really need keybound can go up. Well, I've placed them up here. And, okay, that's a bit, it's saying, well, that's not so professional. That's not such an experienced player wouldn't do that. But look, the reason that they're all up here is most of these you won't use most of the time. In fact, when you're in a dungeon instance, you're actually saving them for the big boss encounters. And it only takes a couple of seconds to click all these. And you'll be clicking all of them in a row, because you want to get all your cooldowns off and then concentrate on your main abilities which you've already keybound. So, Remorseless Winter and Pillar of Frost, that's a good combination. They've both got a minute cooldown. You could actually, I suppose, you could macro that. You could make a macro and put them together and then keybind that. I might start doing that. But you'd also want them separately on your action bar, because Remorseless Winter, again, interchangeable with Death and Decay, so it depends on the cooldowns, when you're using them, when you think it's appropriate to use them, etc. Things like Icebound Fortitude has a 3-minute cooldown. This is a racial, Arcane Torrent is racial with a 2-minute, but you might not have that, so that's negligible here. But Icebound Fortitude, Anti-Magic Shell, okay, 45 seconds, but you're probably only going to use that again against major bosses. Your Empower Rune Weapon is a 5-minute cooldown. Lichburn, which I talked about earlier on, is 2-minute cooldown. Dark Simulacrum, if I can pronounce it correctly, a minute cooldown, but again, you're not going to be using that all the time. I mean, you could keybind it and go and use it. The trouble with this is, though, you've got to kind of watch it to see if it's caught or captured a spell that you could fire back, and sometimes it just doesn't. Probably because I'm not that accustomed to it and I'm not using it that well. That's just some add-ons that can help you with that. But really, again, you're just complicating things. Hit it when you've got a boss. If you see when you glance down your action bars, oh, there's a spell there, it's captured one, I can fire it back, then hit it. And then you've got the big Army of the Dead, which is your 10-minute cooldown. So all of those you can just click. You can just keep those as clickers. That's my advice to you. It's not going to, you know, they're going to be for specific situations. Either when you're soloing a really big boss thing, a bigger target, or when you're in instance or a raid and you just hit them all, and then you can keep your eye on them. If any of them are popping back up, you can use them. Now, briefly, let's talk about some of the other abilities the Frost Death Knight has. Horn of Winter, of course, keep that applied when you're soloing, and when you go, you know, you only have to click it once when you get into a raid or an instance, because it lasts an hour, so you just click that, make sure he's buffed with it, fine. Path of Frost we've talked about. I don't really need to mention Deathgate, but what I want to highlight here is, and a lot of people don't realise this about the Death Knights, in fact I wasn't aware, that their resurrection ability, which is Raise Ally, is actually a combat res. It's a combat res. So you can resurrect your fellow members and raid party, especially healers and things that have gone down. Keep that in mind, that you actually have the ability to combat res somebody. In the middle of combat you can res them, and paladins can't do that. Many classes cannot do that. So, you know, obviously a lot of the healers can, but not everybody can. Mass res can only be used outside of combat anyway, I think, if I remember rightly. So yeah, it's very useful. Control Undead, to be honest, I haven't used it. Absolutely not used it. I could see there are certain situations, but it's one of those spells again, which is just kind of like a nice little add-on. You don't really need it, so don't worry about that. Okay, so that's all the key bindings and the spells and how I've put them together, and that really brings me to the end of how I play the Frost Death Knight. So in summary, what I would do is I would target and I would hit 3, 2, 1 in a row, 3, 2, 1, so I'd be hitting my Chains of Ice at a distance to slow down that target and apply Frost Fever. 2, you know, hitting again with Icy Touch, or if available, hitting Outbreak instead. So if Outbreak's available instead, that will trump Icy Touch, but most of the time it'll be Icy Touch. And then when I get in close, immediately hitting Mind Freeze if it's available. If I'm going into a mob, then it's a choice between hitting down Death and Decay or Remorseless Winter. If it's a particularly difficult mob and I've got both of those on cooldown, I'll apply both. Most of the time for maybe the mobs and things, I'll be hitting Pillar of Frost and Remorseless Winter at once. And then you've got your main striking abilities, which all come into rotation. If you use something like CLC DK, I think it's called, or you can find that on curse.com. There's let's see if I can find it for you quickly. It'll be on my add-ons. There you are, CLC DK, that's what you want. I would also suggest getting Bitten Spell Flash. DK there, those are two great things that will help you with your rotation. You don't have to worry about them so much. And so there you go. I hope you've really enjoyed that. I would be interested in your comments, any advice that any of you have if you've been playing Death Knights for a long time, anything that you feel doesn't really work for you in what I said, or whatever, or if you find this actually quite interesting or useful. I'll leave you with a little bit of a look at this amazing fort, bring up this amazing mount that you can get. Very easy to get this mount if you haven't got it already. You should have on the Horde side. All you need to do is go to Undercity, buy the tablet, do a couple of dungeons, get your reputation exalted, then go to Bree, which is very close. You'll find a vendor, and you can get all of the skeletal horses, and that's one of the most wonderful ones there. Even does an effect as you run along. So there we go. Thank you very much, and have a great day.